Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our 16th session of Kohelet. We're approaching the end of the book. We're at the end of chapter 9, and we'll be reading the end of chapter 9, the beginning of chapter 10. Last time, our reading had a certain focus on why is it that we live in a world where the just do not seem to get their reward, while the evil seem to be able to carry on with their deeds unpunished, and spoke about the ideas of divine justice and how it led also to a history of development of the ideas of the afterlife in Judaism. And today we'll continue, and this can be a different note, a series of sayings and proverbs that some scholars wonder what links them all together, but there is a theme that we'll be seeing, how foolishness can lead to disaster, and on a personal scale and a national scale. And as we've begun the recording, I think it's important to note that we're part of our conversation will probably include current events this morning when Russia invaded the Ukraine, and to dedicate some of our merit from our study and learning to the people of the Ukraine at this time. Okay, so let's go back to Kohelet, our cheery philosopher, and good to have everybody with us. So we are on verse 13 of chapter 9 of Ecclesiastes. And it's we'll see these are prophetic verses we're just about to read, strangely enough. Okay, Alan, will you please kick us off?
This thing too I observed under the sun about wisdom, and it affected me profoundly. There was a little city with few men in it, and to it came a great king who invested it and built mighty siege works against it. Present in the city was a poor wise man who might have saved it with his wisdom, but nobody thought of that poor man. So I observed, wisdom is better than valor, but a poor man's wisdom is scorned, and his words are not heeded. Words spoken softly by wise men are heeded sooner than those shouted by a lord in folly. Wisdom is more valuable than weapons of war, but a single error destroys much of value. Dead flies turn the perfumer's ointment fetid and putrid, so a little folly outweighs massive wisdom. A wise man's mind tends toward the right hand, a fool's toward the left. A fool's mind is also wanting when he travels, and he lets everybody know he is a fool. If the wrath of a lord flares up against you, don't give up your post, for when wrath abates, grave offenses are pardoned. Here is an evil I have seen under the sun, as great as an error committed by a ruler. Folly was placed on lofty heights, while rich men sat in low estate. I have seen slaves on horseback and nobles walking on the ground like slaves. He who digs a pit will fall into it. He who breaches a stone fence will be bitten by a snake. He who quarries stones will be hurt by them. He who splits wood will be harmed by it. If the axe has become dull and he has not whetted the edge, he must exert more strength. Thus, the advantage of a skill depends on the exercise of prudence.
Thank you. Okay, so let's stop there and go back to the end of chapter 9. This thing too I've observed under the sun about wisdom, and it affected me profoundly. So in some sense, one could maybe say, we have a chapter break between these two, but again, chapter breaks come from much later than come from medieval times. One could maybe say that this begins our whole section, which we're reading today, the end of chapter 9, beginning of chapter 10, which is talking about wisdom and folly. So perhaps even though there's a chapter break between the two, this could all be seen as one unit. Let's see what we think. And it's all about under the sun. All right. There was a little city called Ukraine, and a few men were in it, and to it came a great king. So the commentator, present in the sea was a poor wise man who might have saved it with his wisdom, but nobody thought of that poor man. So there are commentators, they look at this, either it's really saying, it's talking about something that happened and Solomon saw this, or the author saw this. Others are wondering if it's a parable for the internal truth. I think both are interesting. If it's an internal truth, what's the little city? This little city is a human being. What are the few men in it? Those are good side, or the poor wise man is a good side. And what's the great king? It's our bad side, our bad inclination that came in very mightily. And if we'd only but listen to the poor wise man, which is our good inclination, then it might have been saved. But we never thought to listen to our good inclination. That's how the commentators see it. If it is a parable, it might just be a city of what a tale of something that he saw in his time. Anybody have any thoughts about this? There was a little city with few men in it. Became a great king who came and built mighty siege works against it. Go ahead.
Kind of makes you wonder what the importance of that little city would be. It would seem like, to invest all that effort against what appears to be unimportant. I mean, it could be a little city sitting on an important route or whatever, but just from this description, it seems like why would the king bother?
And the other question, well, what could the poor wise man have done to save the whole city? How could the poor wise man have saved an entire city with his wisdom? Why did nobody listen to him? How do you understand?
Because he's poor. If he was such a wise man, why is he poor? Wise men should use their wisdom, right, to enrich themselves, or at least to not be poor.
So because he wasn't a macher, because he wasn't
right,
he didn't have power. He wasn't able to. His voice wasn't able to be heard by the others.
Go
ahead.
First of all, if it is an allegory about something internal, usually allegories really, you use circumstances that people can relate to in real life to create the allegories. So I think even if it's supposed to be an allegory for something internal, it is something that people could relate to, that has happened, that they have seen. Otherwise, it's kind of, people go, what? And I have to say, I struggle with this whole thing about injustice and people being mean to other people, and like what's going on with Ukraine, but even just on a day-to-day thing. And I think it's Psalm 73. I always go back to, and I don't agree that wisdom. I mean, I think you were speaking kind of I forget the right term for it, but when you were saying, oh, well, if you're wise, you should be rich. Some people are wise but aren't rich for whatever reason, either by choice or, it's not important to them, or they seek things, for God instead of riches and that sort of thing. But I think the grand majority of people in the world, you're right, they look to people who are powerful and wealthy for exactly what you said. So I'm kind of babbling. I'll shut up and leave it at that.
No, Nancy, Dan, I think that's what Nancy meant. That's what people are saying. I don't think she was saying that, but she was saying people think, well, let's trust
Right.
let's trust the people who are powerful and rich, because they're the ones we think they're the ones who are wise, but there could be our radar for what's wise and what's not wise is not always very good. I think there's something very true and deep there that's in this whole section.
And that's what I was trying to say. I couldn't think of the word for it. The word wasn't allegory. I mean, because I knew what she was trying to say, but I couldn't think of the word for it, so it didn't come out clearly.
No, thank you for sharing.
What that section reminds me of is and this is sort of strange, but in the Taoist book of prayer, the Tao Te Ching, there are different verses, and there's one verse about a wise man in a cave. And he doesn't meet anybody else, but through his thoughts, he controls the city. And that's very interesting, because this is a little bit close to that. So he's talking about some kind of mystical relationship, perhaps, between somebody who is actually keeping his thoughts completely to himself. He's not talking about it, but somehow through his thoughts, maybe his prayers to God, who knows what, he's helping out the city.
Very, very, very interesting, and I'm not sure if that's the pshat of the text, but I love that. There's this idea, in Buddhism and in Hinduism and in maybe Hasidic and Kabbalistic Judaism that there's a way of that. Obviously, our prayers help the world. That's all religion, but that there is our silence can also help the world if it's sending peace and sending energy to others. There's a famous saying in the Talmud where there's a very poor sage, one of the poorest of the early generations, and someone is wondering, what's the value of this, of what he's doing, and he's struggling so much, and a heavenly voice says the whole world is kept alive. The whole world is sustained because of Hanina ben Dosa, because of him. And the word for because in Hebrew is bishvil Hanina ben Dosa. The whole world is sustained because of Hanina ben Dosa, the Talmud says. So then the Baal Shem Tov comments, bishvil also means in the path. And then he says in the pipe. And so he says, holy people, this is the idea I think you're getting to. This is the Hasidic way of understanding. The holy people are like creating a pipe into the world for divine attributes that can help sustain it. But I'm not sure that's what the text, the text, it's a really good question though. Does the poor wise man want to tell the people? My intuitive reading of it was saying the poor wise man is trying to say, hey, I've got something to tell you that could win the war, but why don't you listen to me? And the people are not listening to him. But that's an interesting reading where he's there and they just didn't go consult the poor wise man. Instead, they went to consult the foolish, powerful man. I don't know, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. On that very point, and Will, to underline your question there, it seems to me, I'd ask what you might think of Alter's translation, because these Hebrew verbs, I gather, I've always struggled, not that I understand them at all well, but that they're very tricky that way, whether it's a conditional verb, the way our translation has it, or whether it's can be taken as a past tense that he saved the town. And the reason Alter argues that in what I think is as a parable, I think that's the literary form of this little story, at least it seems that way to me, is that if the person saved the town, and then it says lo zachar, no one remembered this. No one recalled that the person, in other words, if it could have happened in the past, one way to read that is he did save the town, and maybe they were appreciated at the time, but they don't remember him anymore because he was this poor nebbish, and in fact that he gave them the right advice and saved the town. It sort of heightens the observation that.
Could you mind reading his translation of the verse?
Yeah, sure. I would not at all mind. Let me see. What verse is it now?
15.
15, right. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. And okay. And there was found within it, that is the town or city, a poor wise man, and that person saved the town through his wisdom, but no one recalled, there's the Zachar, that poor man.
Mhm.
No one recalled him. It's like he did it and it didn't matter anymore because they had moved on and he wasn't getting the PR.
Well, it's a complicated verse. The those two verbs, milet and zachar.
Okay.
We're not, milet does even mean to save. That's a little bit unclear too. But you're right. It could be this whole verse could have happened in the past, or it could be a conditional. He might have saved it. So it's impossible to know. In some sense, maybe it doesn't change it too often. It changes our perception of the poor wise man. The way the JPS translates it here, I imagine, is this poor wise man trying to bang on doors, telling them, I've got this information that's going to save you. Well, the other one maybe is closer to a poor wise man, had something that was able to save the town, but they didn't recall him, and then it created trouble. But it is Hebrew tenses are not precise enough always to give us the shades, and there's many different shades of meaning.
My translation is the same as Phil's, pretty much the same. He extricated the city through his wisdom, but no man remembered that poor man.
Mm-hmm. So let's go into the next verse and see how that affects her.
Phil's translation reminds me of the story of Joseph. And that wasn't a poor man, that was a rich and powerful man whose deeds were forgotten.
You mean who's Joseph? A few generations later, they forgot what he done. And see how easily the powerful are able to twist memory and make it fit their vision of what happened or what should be, and rewrite history with might. Right, the Pharaoh in Egypt forgot Joseph and forgot that the Jews were there as guests, and then turned them into slaves. And we see how easily that can happen. So then we move on to this next verse following that. So I observed, wisdom is better than valor, but a poor man's wisdom is scorned, and his words are not heeded. Is that in a sense saying, wisdom is great, but if you don't listen to the wisdom, it's not of much use to you. Or maybe it's saying what Nancy was saying before, or what she was implying, what people are saying, if you want your words to be listened to, you better acquire power. I mean, maybe this is also a realistic view of the world. But the few verses are confusing. Anybody have any other thoughts on this verse 16? So I observe wisdom is better than valor, and a poor man's wisdom is scorned, and his words are not heeded. So that poor man's wisdom is not listened to, his words are not heeded, even though his wisdom is better than the might, than the valor of the powerful.
I mean, Rabbi, you said, the poor man needs to get power to be listened to, but the opposite message of this is, don't ignore the poor person. He can have things of value.
Yes. The message is don't believe, don't be blinded by wealth and power as your means of judging people. Don't judge people by wealth and power necessarily, but accept that wisdom is beyond worldly success.
We often seem to think that because someone has a great wealth, is his or her ideas about what should be done to improve society or the world must have wisdom in them. And we see the refutation of this all the time, but we go on listening to the certain billionaires say and letting them do their projects for the world and not really closely examining later whether they got it wrong, because there's a presumption, picking up on Alan's point, that if you're so smart, why ain't you rich? And the other side of that is, if you're rich, you must be very smart, at least if you made it,
And maybe even more prevalent in our society are celebrities, right? Actors and actresses who make pronouncements on politics and all kinds of issues, and are listened to and have millions of Twitter followers, and you wonder, how much wisdom there is in their assessment, and what gives them that wisdom in those areas. And when
they're trading on their fame to achieve a political end, which may be a good or bad end, but the very rich man is often not questioned that way. If he says we should do something, change our educational system, say, people feel there must be a great wisdom in that, and there isn't that kind of questioning, at least not from the same quarters.
Interesting. Words, then verse 17, words spoken gently or softly by wise men are heeded sooner than those shouted by a lord in folly. This is a verse that can be taken completely differently. And it could actually mean, I don't know if anybody else has this meaning, could mean that the words of sages are pleasant to hear, and the shout of lords and the shout and fools and the sound of foolish leaders sounds like screaming. Phil, what do you have for that one? You're on mute, or Nancy, or Diane.
Sorry.
My translation.
Alter says, I think he's following the same logic of it as the first version. The words of the wise gently said are heard more than the shout of the ruler among fools. So that doesn't contradict the tenor of our.
Sure. Diane, what did you say you have? See.
Actually, the main translation I use is identical to use. I do have another translation here, though, that says the words of the wise heard in quietness are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's closer to what I was saying. Mm-hmm.
I'm looking it up now.
How does it link into what we're talking about? It's a little bit complicated in my mind. Because we've just been. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, we've just been hearing how the words spoken softly by wise men are not generally heeded. So it's, how do we work this into what we had before? Maybe we can't. Go ahead.
A thought that I have, Rabbi, about it is before they were saying that wisdom is better than valor. And if valor is courage in war, if the wisdom is not used, with courage, then in a way, what good is it? I mean, it's good to be smart, but if it's not applied, and whether it's people don't listen to the person who has the wisdom, or the person who has wisdom doesn't have the courage to go out and use it to help someone, then you know, it's no good, you know, for that person or community.
Definitely. Yeah, there's a real powerful, through all the verses we're about to read too, the powerful idea of, you know, wisdom is this wonderful, powerful thing, but you also need to create the conditions for it to be heard and for people to follow it and to put it into action. And it's the world's a messy place, and you can't just have your lofty ideas in your tower nobody's listening to. You have to go and make it happen, because you know, what we see in this next verse, right? I mean, our heated suit, wisdom is more valuable than weapons of war, but a single error destroys much of value. It's the single error can also be translated as a single sinner can destroy much of value. I don't know if anybody has that translation.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. A sense that our world, in our world, it's much easier to destroy than to rebuild, and that wisdom is so easily cast aside. And what do you have as a full translation of that verse 18?
I have wisdom is better than weapons, and one sinner destroys much good.
You know, if you go with the sinner thing, then the wisdom doesn't have to necessarily be spoken or be transmitted. It's possible he's talking about a more mystical view of wisdom, like I was mentioning earlier, of the guy sitting in the cave in the Tao Te Ching, who just thinking does something, sort of sparks something, and nobody knows about it. He keeps his mouth shut about it, etc. Now that goes along with a sinner. A sinner doesn't have to be a public sin. Obviously, it can be a quiet sin. It can be a sin that's unknown to anybody except himself and maybe something divine. So it's possible he's talking about a more mystical view of wisdom, which I like because it's sort of more romantic somehow.
I hear what you're saying. You're saying that view would be talking to an idea that there's an effect in the world. It's also and I think it offers us from where we are something that we can also do in situations like today, which is if we bring peace and if we bring goodness from our own hearts into the world, we're contributing to that in the world. While if we're feeling hate and feeling negativity, but it's saying that the whole world is interconnected. And that a person where they are trying to bring just thinking, but bringing peace into the world, bringing wisdom to the world, can affect the fabric of the universal consciousness on some level. Well, I mean, it's the whole basis of prayer on some level, right? On some level, that is the basis of prayer, which is the idea that a prayer has the power. You know, when you're doing a prayer, you're not doing an action, but you're sending out a good thought. You're petitioning God, the ruler of all, or the universal consciousness, to make a change in our world that's governed by its laws. Anyway, interesting idea. But that would explain the wisdom is more valuable than weapons of war.
Can I just ask a boring, I'm
Sure.
afraid, but not to me, question about that word that the JPS has as error, or that's chote, right?
Okay. Mhm.
And so to me, that's, I mean, alter translates as offender, or sinner is another, is another one. So person who does the chet, does the offense, or how is it that it can be the wrong itself or the error itself? Because I'm sure there's a reason for it, but I don't understand it.
You're saying why would
Why
it doesn't say chet echad, it says chote echad.
Well, why does it say chote as a not as the actor, but as the thing done, the object that is the noun.
We're I guess because it's the translation is that, so we have from their root, which is chet tet aleph, we have the word sin, chet, which is
Right,
the one that we know best,
right,
but that chote can be a noun formed out of that, which would mean a sinner or an offender, but could also be a noun meaning a mistake.
Oh, it can. That's my question. I see. I didn't know
They
that.
can. They're seeing it as a different construction of the same root that could mean something else. I mean, the word chote in itself. Let's see here. We're gonna have a little bit of fun. Why not? So let's see. Let me know if you can follow this.
Yeah.
Is your screen changing? Let's see. Yes.
Yes. Right. Yeah. Oh, this is good. Yeah.
Let's see if the word chote comes up often in Tanakh, in Bible. So we're doing a search, a concordance search. Let's see. So it used to be that you had to search in a concordance. Let's see, come on. Could be that it's not recognizing the Nikud. So I'll just put it in. There we go. Okay. So you see, it's not a very common word. It's not a word. The word for, you would think the word for sinner comes up a lot, but it doesn't. So here we have a verse from Isaiah. Here, we'll go pull up in the translation. It's Isaiah 55:20. And then here we have our we have verses from Proverbs. Let's just go look that up here. We'll have a little bit of fun. Let's see. Sorry about that. I can't see my. There we go. So we'll go to Safari and look up Isaiah. Can everybody follow this? Can you see on my screen what I'm doing? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Isaiah 55:20. And let's see. Right, Samech Memnun. I'm 65. Sorry. Yes, it's 65. Let's see. Sorry about that. Getting confused in my Hebrew letters, right? Because in the traditional way of numbering chapters is through Hebrew letters. So with Samech He, which I thought was 55, but I'm reminded that Samech He is actually 65. So here we are. This is a verb. You can see chote here. No more shall there be an infant or gray beard who does not live out his days. He who dies at 100 years shall be reckoned a youth, and he who fails to reach 100. So here it is, a person. It's one who fails, who makes a mistake, but it is a person. It's not a noun. It's an actor, not an object. He who fails, he who fails to reach 100 shall be reckoned accursed. So that does lend credence to that reading that we had back where we were, that it was an actor, not an object, a mistake. Was that useful, Phil?
It was, but I guess I will have to look later to see examples that support the JPS translation. I don't mean to take your time on that, but yes, because to me it's like it just looks like one of those verbal nouns that means a person who does something or the doing. Yeah, that's all I meant. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay. And as I quickly, as I was looking through the other examples, they also seem to be actors. Yeah, these are all actors. None of these are nouns. So I don't know where I got that reading from. Very JPS, they're smart people, so they must have a reason why they did that. Okay. So now we're coming to the dead flies. Somebody read for us these first few verses.
Dead flies turn the perfumer's ointment fetid and putrid, so little folly outweighs massive wisdom. A wise man's mind tends toward the right hand, a fool's towards the left. A fool's mind is also wanting when he travels, and he lets everybody know he is a fool.
Let's just stop there for now. Dead flies, they turn the perfumer's ointment. Literally, the oil of the oil of the perfumer, or in our day, the pharmacist, fetid and putrid. So little folly outweighs massive wisdom.
It's interesting. He uses the sense of smell to deal with this. I mean, he could have used all kinds of other things. He could have used vision. He could have used hearing, but he uses the sense of smell to talk about the way something can be made from one thing into another. From something can be made beautiful into something putrid.
What do you make of that? Why this sense of smell? Is it
I'm not exactly sure. I got to think about that a while. I'll have to see whether the sense of smell is a big deal. Eating is, there's a lot of stuff in the Torah about eating honey. Okay,
Yes.
if you eat too much honey, it's going to make you sick. And they're talking about sort of the flow of the divine that some people experience when they're talking about honey, and that is a sense of taste. But this is a sense of smell, which is sort of related to the sense of taste. But I'm not sure exactly what that means.
Well, I think the sense of smell is in some ways, I think, not sure if it's scientists or religious people, but consider it in some ways our most primordial of our senses, or there's nothing like a sense of smell that brings up memory. We all have that experience. You smell something and it's a memory comes up in your mind of something, of your childhood or of a person, or sometimes I'll smell my grandfather wore a certain cologne as all years ago, and I smell it sometimes, and the second I smell it, I have these memories of Russian of my grandfather because it was so distinct in my mind. I think we all have that, or the smells of summer, of fields, so many smells. And in Kabbalah, actually, in Jewish mysticism, the sense of smell is considered to be the most spiritual of all the senses. Considered to be so that. But here, I mean, I was thinking as you were speaking, you can. I mean, we all know that it doesn't take much to ruin a good dish, right? You can have a really delicious dish, and one you can change one ingredient, and your dish does not taste the same. But maybe smell is even worse. Maybe it is true that a smell is easily. But here it's not only smell. here it's also something that's valuable, something that's beautiful, something that's used to anoint, and then a dead fly comes. So what's the dead fly represent?
For me, when I read this, I think of, it depends on what you read. You feed your mind and your soul and your spirit, because you can either feed yourself, negative things, and you can, well, and it's kind of what we were talking about before, negative energy into the universe and what you bring into your mind, because it's, we've all seen those people who are angry and angry can be self-perpetuating, or people who get so twisted about, what's going on in somebody else's life and, that sort of thing. Instead of feeding your mind with positive things and things that are going to enrich you and bring you wisdom, instead you feed it with foolish stuff and that sort of thing. So
Beautiful, thank you.
that's my rambling for a second.
No, I like that. I think, we also, all of us have the experience. I mean, attaining peace of mind and wisdom takes a lot of work, but it's not hard to have a little folly come into your mind and ruin all of your peace of mind, right? It's how quickly a little anger you mentioned, but it can also be other, a little folly, a little anxiety can come and completely wipe away our peace and our sense of, wisdom comes from an even mind, on some level, right? When we have an even mind, then we're able to be wise because we're in a reflective place or in an aware place. We're present, and from there we can be wise. But it doesn't take a few dead flies, a little bit of disturbance, and suddenly the folly is easily disturbing our even mind, our wisdom, our peace.
Or the dead flies could be like the sinner in the previous line.
Beautiful.
The
So
disturbed wisdom.
so it's so in that case, so the folly is like it's like a single sinner, a single thing, a single sinner coming with folly can suddenly sow panic. Is that what you mean? In a kind of, in a more good general sense, or?
Yes, I think so.
I think that probably, if you read the verses together, might be the most simple meaning of all of it, which is that it's the same idea twice, right? One after the other, which is that the dead flies are like the single sinner, right? You can have everybody, a whole group of people who are about to make the wise decision, and then one person comes in and starts to sow doubt or starts to bring in something else, and this and everything, and that outweighs very easily. I mean, it's a very a little depressing, but maybe real idea of how human beings are, that how easily we get turned away from. That seems to be the theme anyhow, doesn't it? That how easy we get turned away from wisdom, and we start to believe nonsense, right? And folly.
Because there are a lot of dead flies. There are dead flies everywhere you look. I mean, you cannot escape dead flies, whereas wisdom is rare and valuable. The perfumer's ointment is rare and valuable, but everywhere you turn, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you're not paying attention, you're not cleaning up. You will find dead flies wherever you go. So I'm actually caught up in this idea of the corruption, right? The corruption is everywhere, right? Sometimes it's in rich men, right? Who don't know what they're talking about over, the wisdom of the poor man. Yet wisdom is so easily corrupted, right? I mean, that's what I'm getting from this. It is so easily corrupted, and it should be more valued than it is in these verses. And I'm not seeing its value. I'm seeing how easily it's corrupted. I'm seeing how poor men who have it are despised. It seems to be by throwing all this negativity on it, by throwing all the dead flies on it, we seem to be questioning its valor.
Even ruining its value.
It ruins, yeah, its value is ruined, it's corrupted, and so if it's so easily corrupted and we don't value it anyway, right, especially if it appears in poor men, then what good is it doing us?
Well, and I really liked how you said there are a lot of dead flies, and especially if you lived in biblical times, I imagine there were even more dead flies everywhere, right? You don't have to, they lived without screens, they lived with a lot of animals around them coming in and out of their houses, probably. There were dead flies everywhere. So maybe the lesson is you have to make sure you close the bottle of ointment, protect your wisdom. Protect your wisdom and make sure that you value it and it's seen and it's not.
Protect your wisdom,
Protect your wisdom and share it and raise it as a value. Raise it as a value and wisdom. Wisdom is so easily tainted, and I think it's so true. And I'm letting my own personal stance on what's happening now in the Ukraine maybe get into my mind, but I think for the last decade or more, leaders of the West have been ignoring Putin's rise and everything he's been doing and not preparing for this moment. I mean, it's easy to say that with hindsight, perhaps, but relying on resources and anyhow, it's easy to ignore the wisdom, which should be to look with clear sight of what's happening before you. And it's easy to say, well, we'll deal with it when the time comes. Let's just do what we need to do in this moment. And how easy to then you push the wisdom away, and it gets thrown off. But again, that's my personal thoughts of all of this. But the thing for all of us, our wisdom, our moments of wisdom and of seeing clearly and deeply are often cast aside. And then once we've cast them aside, we leave them aside and we just continue going in the other direction. And we forget that we ever had that flash of wisdom.
If I read the Art Scroll comments
Yes.
correctly, while it says dead flies, the comment says basically all you need is one.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a bunch of dying flies, all you need is one to get in there. And all you need is one bad thought, no matter how good a person you are. One bad thought could push out all the good, even whether on an individual level or a group level. So, you kind of have to be aware and careful of that one bad influence.
To underscore Alan's point, you can read it. I got this from Alter. You can read it with just moving the final yod in the first word in the phrase to the beginning of the next word. Instead of flies of death, you can have
dying fly.
You can have a dead fly, a zavuv. Is that it? Zavuv yamut, a fly that dies. So you can have just one fly. In fact, he translates it that way. A dead fly. You can see that.
He's translating it that way because the verbs yavish and yabia are also in the singular too. So it's
okay, that too.
Rabbi, I have a question. Does this have anything to do with, let's say, you're having thoughts say you're having good thoughts, but then all of a sudden you get a feeling, like a feeling of fear or of dread or something like that. And that affects, your well-being and whatever wisdom you might have.
Your peace.
So I guess what I'm asking is that, are they really talking about, bad thoughts, or are they talking about bad feelings that would affect, what you're thinking?
Well, our tradition looks at these verses often metaphorically, as we've been saying, these are thoughts or feelings or, there are many ways of looking at it, but it doesn't, one could just say in general, it doesn't take much bad to ruin something precious, dead fly in your glass, isn't that for us, maybe isn't that different than, there goes your drink or there goes your food, right? Your dead fly ends up in your bowl of soup. You're probably not going to finish that bowl of soup in our day. And then, this next verse too, a wise man's mind tends towards the right hand and a fool's towards the left, is also interpreted, can also be interpreted about the mind, right? The mind is always, you always can take your mind one way or the other way. You can take your mind to the positive, you could take your mind to the negative. You can go right or you can go left. If we bring in so much of what we've been looking in Kohelet, which is, a lot of life may be predestined. That's one view of religion. There's even a view of religion that everything is predestined, but what you can control are your thoughts and your reaction to everything. Even if you don't subscribe to that view that everything is predestined, you say, well, we have complete free will. Often we find in our lives, there's things that happen to us, and we can't control them, but what we can control is how we think about them. Illness or loss or many things in our lives, we have no control, but we can control our minds and our feelings. And that's the one place where we do have control of our inner being. And we can, right, in the ancient world, the right was considered better than the left. I'm left-handed, so I don't like that. But that was the way it was seen.
Adroit.
The sinistral side is the left hand, the
Yes.
sinistral side.
The right hand was better. Well, and up until recently, in my case, even though it wasn't that long ago, and growing up in France, the teachers were not happy about me writing with my left hand and let me have it often. So there's it goes back very far, this anti-left-handedness.
You're gauche.
Yes, exactly.
In my parents' day, you switched them.
Yeah.
Didn't matter. Yeah, because I have two left-handed children, and when my mother came to visit, when my daughter was using her left hand, she said early on, well, just switch her. So of course I tried because my mother told me I should try, but it didn't work. And then I never bothered with my.
Well, I used to be left-handed.
Oh yeah,
I was
you were
switched.
switched.
I was
That's right.
switched, yeah.
There you go. Maybe that was the right way to do it. Minimize the left-handedness.
It's all
Well,
in-
it's all in the head anyway, right? It's all so. I think we'll stop here for now. We'll continue next time, and we'll let's all a blessing that we should send our thoughts to those right places. They find us wisdom and to bring us peace and well-being, and to the people in our lives. And a prayer for our world at this challenging time.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi. and Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Everybody.
Thank you for the interesting conversation. It's very illuminating.
Thank you, Charles. Great to know you're there in the back.